In this video, we're going to be breaking down the most shocking character lore in Rick and Morty. Let's get started with every version of Rick explained. Rick Sanchez might seem like just a cynical drunk with a portal gun, but there's a lot more to him than that. Behind the sarcasm and genius-level inventions is a man built out of grief, rage, and a desperate need to stay one step ahead of pain. Rick travels across realities like it's nothing, but really, he's running. From every version of the truth he can't face, from the people he's hurt, from himself.
Let's do this then! You're welcome, by the way. I made you.
To really understand Rick C137, we have to go deeper than the catchphrases and chaos. We need to look at the losses that shattered him, the power that isolates him, and the relationships he can't quite destroy, no matter how hard he tries. In this video, we'll be breaking down every version of Rick explained, so grab your flask, recalibrate your portal gun, and let's take a look at the story of Rick Sanchez. But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Rick C137 starts out as the genius who's already broken. Before we see any grand adventures across infinite realities, he's this drunk old man who treats family dinner like a hostage situation. That garage is his fortress, his laboratory, his personal corner of suburbia where he builds weapons of mass destruction and calls it Tuesday afternoon. This is Rick C137, our main Rick, the one we follow through every season. He's the Rick who lost everything and decided the universe owed him payback. His days follow the same toxic pattern. Wake up with a hangover, grab more alcohol, mock Jerry's existence, then vanish into his workshop while the family debates shipping him off to a nursing home. He emerges only to drag Morty away from school for some experiment that could kill them both. We get our first real glimpse into Rick C137's twisted routine in Season 1, Episode 1, The Pilot. Middle of the night, Rick stumbles into Morty's room completely wasted, rambling about destroying all of humanity. He's cobbled together this flying death trap and wants to collect Jessica so she and Morty can restart civilization after he nukes everyone else. When Morty fights back, Rick suddenly claims the whole thing was just a test to make his grandson more assertive. Then he passes out while his neutrino bomb arms itself in the background. This scene reveals everything about how Rick C137 operates. He creates apocalyptic scenarios, pretends they're educational experiences, then either abandons them when called out or doubles down until someone else stops him. The bomb situation was probably real until Morty forced him to back down. Our Rick's baseline is maximum chaos wrapped in condescending lectures. The pattern repeats when Rick C137 drags Morty to Dimension 35C for mega seeds. Rick delivers this inspiring speech about conquering fear and charging headfirst into danger. Then an alien monster appears and he immediately screams about imminent death and how he's never encountered anything this terrifying. Pure Rick C137 behavior. Build yourself up as the expert, panic when reality disagrees, then act like the panic was strategic. Rick C137's handling of the Megaseed mission shows his standard operating procedure. Morty shatters both legs because Rick forgot to mention the gravity boots need activation. Instead of taking responsibility, our Rick lectures about equipment protocols, then disappears through a portal to grab healing serum from some future dimension. He returns, patches Morty up like nothing happened, and immediately puts him back to work harvesting fruit. At Interdimensional Customs, Rick C137 forces Morty to smuggle the seeds internally because Rick's own body is too experienced for the job. When security catches them, Rick tells Morty to shoot the guards because they're just robots. They're not robots, they're customs agents, but our Rick simply doesn't respect authority figures. His worldview reduces everyone to either useful assets or annoying obstacles. The episode concludes with Rick C137 admitting that his claims about adventures making Morty smarter were complete fiction. The temporary intelligence came from mega seeds dissolving in Morty's digestive system. While his grandson convulses and loses motor control, Rick stands over him excitedly planning future expeditions. Rick and Morty forever and forever, 100 years, he declares as Morty writhes on the garage floor. Season 1, Episode 6, Rick Potion number 9, demonstrates exactly how Rick C137 handles problems in his normal life. Morty requests a love potion for Jessica. Rick calls it beneath him, but creates one anyway using Vole DNA since Voles bond for life. He hands over the serum like he's being generous, then casually mentions after Morty leaves that flu complications might occur.
Hey, there's no dangers or anything or side effects, right?
Whoa, what am I, a hack? Go nuts, Morty. It's foolproof. Unless she has the flu.
Jessica has the flu. The potion spreads through the school dance and suddenly everyone wants Morty romantically. Rick C137's fix? An antidote using praying mantis genetics because mantises are vole opposites. They mate once, then kill their partners. Now everyone wants both romance and cannibalism with Morty. Our Rick's third attempt mixes DNA from 7 different species including koala, shark, and dinosaur. When Morty questions how this creates normal humans, Rick C137 explodes. You want me to show my math? Are you the scientist or the kid trying to get laid? The result transforms Earth's population into grotesque flesh monsters Rick names Cronenbergs. Here's what makes Rick C137's world so disturbing. He never actually solves anything. When the entire planet becomes uninhabitable, our Rick's solution involves finding a dimension where he fixed everything but died accidentally. They bury their alternate corpses in the backyard and assume their dead selves' lives. Problem erased, Rick C137 style. This becomes crucial later because Rick C137 and Morty are now technically the only original characters we follow. The family they're living with belongs to the dead Rick and Morty they replaced. Our Rick has been doing this dimension-swapping routine for years, abandoning realities whenever his mistakes pile up too high. But here's the thing. C137 isn't the only Rick out there, not even close. There are Ricks who sold out, Ricks who rebelled, and Ricks who formed governments. We'll be talking about those Ricks later, and trust me, they make C137 look almost normal. If you think this Rick is bad, wait till you meet the others. Rick C137's everyday existence runs on complete moral bankruptcy. He generates catastrophes, worsens them through arrogant experimentation, then escapes accountability by abandoning whole realities. The cluttered garage, constant drinking, family contempt, everything serves one function. Our Rick has constructed a lifestyle where consequences never stick because infinite dimensions mean infinite escape routes. His routine depends on the mythology that superior intelligence justifies any action. But examine it closely, and the foundation crumbles. Rick C137 requires Morty as an unquestioning sidekick who never challenges his methods. He needs a family that provides stability while tolerating his destruction. He craves problems to solve so he can demonstrate his brilliance, even when he creates those problems himself. Right now, this system functions perfectly for Rick C137. The garage stays equipped with stolen alien technology. Morty continues following him into danger. The replacement family keeps welcoming him back regardless of collateral damage. Our Rick's identity revolves around outrunning consequences through dimensional travel, but eventually, he'll encounter a situation that universe hopping cannot fix. And when that happens, we'll discover what Rick C137 really becomes when running away stops being an option. Rick C137 lives without consequences now, but it all started with one choice that ruined his life forever. Curious Rick gets a visitor who changes everything, and his response ruins his life forever. Season 3, Episode 1, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, shows us the exact moment when Rick's world gets turned upside down through a single conversation that lasts maybe 2 minutes but destroys decades of happiness. Rick Prime appears through a portal like he owns the place, immediately treating young Rick like they're old friends. He starts with this casual, well, if it isn't us, like he's meeting another version of himself at a coffee shop. But then Rick Prime drops the bombshell that changes everything. He explains that young Rick is actually behind the curve when it comes to scientific achievement. You know the worst part about inventing teleportation? Suddenly you're able to travel the whole galaxy, and the first thing you learn is, you're the last guy to invent teleportation. Rick Prime delivers this line like he's sharing some inside joke, but he's actually crushing young Rick's entire worldview. Everything young Rick thought made him special, his intelligence, his scientific achievements, his progress on teleportation, turns out to be ordinary across infinite realities. Rick Prime then makes his pitch, and it's absolutely incredible. He offers young Rick portal technology that would make him the smartest thing in every conceivable universe, the infinite Rick, a god. He paints this picture of unlimited power where Rick could do anything he wants, then hop to a timeline where he never did it. Complete freedom from consequences, infinite knowledge, unlimited power across all realities. The way Rick Prime sells this opportunity is brilliant and terrifying. He appeals directly to young Rick's scientific curiosity and his desire for significance. Instead of being the smartest man on one planet, Rick could become the smartest being across infinite universes. Instead of being limited by the laws of physics in one reality, he could transcend every limitation that exists. But Rick Prime also reveals something darker about the offer. He talks about having infinite selves and describes it as a non-stop party where all the guests guests are the only person we like. The isolation built into this offer is staggering. Rick Prime is essentially saying that once you become an infinite being, other people stop mattering because they're all just variations of patterns you've seen before. Young Rick listens to this entire pitch and his response is immediate and devastating. Sounds lonely. That's it. 2 words that completely reject everything Rick Prime just offered. Young Rick identifies the core problem with infinite power. It separates you from genuine human connection. He sees right through the appeal of godhood to the emptiness underneath. Rick Prime gets genuinely confused by this response. Lonely? Dude, you have yourself, your infinite selves. He can't understand why anyone would choose limitation over limitless power. The idea that connection with other people could be more valuable than ultimate knowledge genuinely doesn't compute for Rick Prime. He's already lost the ability to see other beings as real. When young Rick says, pass, the casual dismissal hits Rick Prime like a slap in the face. Excuse me? Bro, Ricks don't pass on this. Who do you think you are? Rick Prime's reaction reveals that he's never encountered a Rick who would refuse this offer. The multiverse is apparently full of Ricks who chose power over connection, making young Rick's refusal genuinely shocking. Young Rick doubles down on his refusal by calling himself a different kind of Rick. He's explicitly rejecting the idea that all Ricks are the same, that they all want the same things, that they all make the same choices. This version of Rick has found something more valuable than infinite knowledge, a life worth living in one reality with people who matter to him. Rick Prime's response to this refusal is immediate and brutal. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. The threat is barely veiled. Rick Prime has just learned that young Rick values his family more than power, which means he's learned exactly how to hurt him. The offer was really a test, and young Rick failed by choosing love over ambition. The conversation ends with Rick Prime disappearing, but the damage is already done. He's identified young Rick's weakness, his attachment to his family, and he's going to exploit it. The bomb that kills Diane and Beth follows immediately after this conversation, showing that Rick Prime's real message was, join us willingly, or we'll force you to join us through suffering. What makes this sequence so devastating is how Rick Prime functions as both messenger and destroyer. He brings the opportunity that could have elevated young Rick to godhood, but when Rick refuses to abandon his humanity, Rick Prime takes away the very thing that made him choose humanity in the first place. The offer becomes a trap designed to destroy anyone who chooses differently. Young Rick's refusal also reveals the central tragedy of his character. He was right to refuse the offer. Choosing family over infinite power was the morally correct decision, but the universe punished him for making the right choice by taking away everything that made the choice worthwhile. Rick Prime essentially proved that good people can't survive in a multiverse full of infinite Ricks. The conversation sets up the entire series because it establishes Rick Prime as the force that destroyed young Rick's ability to choose love over power. Every terrible thing our Rick does throughout the show stems from this moment when he learned that refusing to become a monster gets the people you love killed. Rick Prime didn't just offer portal technology, he offered a lesson about how the multiverse really works, and young Rick learned it the hard way. Rick gave up power to stay human and got punished for it, but later he meets a version of himself that shows he didn't have to turn cruel to stay strong. When everything starts falling apart, when 6 days of adventures leave you shaking, when your hands tremble from trauma, and even your own grandson looks at you like you might be the problem, what do? If you're Rick Sanchez, you finally admit you need help. But what happens when that help comes from within yourself? What happens when the person who shows you how to be better is literally the better version of you? That's exactly what unfolds in Season 3, Episode 6, Rest and Ricklaxation. After a brutal 6-day adventure that leaves both Rick and Morty completely broken down, they decide to visit an alien spa. Rick's hands shake uncontrollably, Morty breaks down crying. For the first time, Rick admits he might hate himself and thinks he deserves to die. At the spa, they try a detox machine that supposedly removes all toxicity. The machine works, but in the most twisted way possible. It literally separates their toxic traits from their healthy ones, creating 4 distinct people: Healthy Rick, Toxic Rick, Healthy Morty, and Toxic Morty. Here's where things get fascinating. Healthy Rick becomes everything we never knew Rick could be. He's supportive, emotionally mature, and genuinely caring. When he accidentally hurts someone's feelings at the spa, he apologizes sincerely and takes responsibility. He tells Morty he's proud to be his grandfather. He uses his genius for positive problem solving instead of destruction. This version of Rick, Healthy Rick, shows us what mentorship could look like if it came from a place of wellness instead of dysfunction. Healthy Rick encourages Morty to pursue Jessica with confidence. He builds him up instead of tearing him down. He demonstrates emotional intelligence and moral reasoning that regular Rick completely lacks. But the episode gets really complex when we see what the machine can considered toxic about Rick. Toxic Rick contains all the traits we usually associate with Rick: the genius, the confidence, the willingness to make hard decisions. But he also has the lying, the manipulation, the God complex, and the desperate need to control everything. The controversial truth this episode reveals is that Rick's toxicity might be inseparable from his effectiveness. Healthy Rick is kind and supportive, but he also becomes passive when faced with real danger. When toxic Rick threatens to make the entire world toxic, healthy Rick initially refuses to intervene, saying they have no right to choose which worlds get saved. Toxic Rick, meanwhile, represents everything wrong with Rick's usual approach to relationships. He's desperate to merge back with his healthy half, but only because he needs that part of himself to function. He's controlling, manipulative, and completely dependent on having power over Morty. When he's separated from his healthy traits, his genius becomes purely destructive.
The episode shows us that Rick's normal personality is a combination of these extremes. His intelligence comes packaged with arrogance. His ability to make tough decisions comes with emotional detachment. His survival instincts come with cruelty and selfishness. What makes this story brilliant is how it explores the nature of personal growth. Healthy Rick represents the person Rick could become if he worked on himself. He shows patience, empathy, and genuine care for others. He takes responsibility for his actions and tries to make amends when he hurts people. But the episode also suggests that this kind of radical change might come at a cost. Healthy Rick loses some of Rick's edge, his willingness to do whatever it takes to survive and protect his family. When real danger comes, he hesitates to act because his moral compass points toward non-interference. The climax reveals something crucial about how change actually works. Rick can only defeat toxic Rick by understanding what his toxic half truly values. Despite all his claims about being superior and independent, toxic Rick cares deeply about toxic Morty. Rick uses this knowledge to force the merger, shooting toxic Morty with a virus that will kill him unless toxic Rick agrees to reunite. This moment shows that even Rick's worst traits come from somewhere real. His toxicity includes his attachments to people, his irrational need to protect those he loves even when it hurts them. The machine separated these feelings as toxic because Rick himself sees emotional attachment as a weakness. Toxic Rick reveals that he's been trapped in Rick's brain for 70 years, suggesting these destructive patterns have been building for decades. He represents all of Rick's accumulated pain, anger, and defensive mechanisms. But even toxic Rick shows genuine care for toxic Morty, proving that Rick's capacity for love exists even in his worst form. Healthy Rick, on the other hand, demonstrates what Rick could accomplish if he channeled his genius through kindness instead of cruelty. He's still brilliant, still capable, but he uses his abilities to lift others up rather than tear them down. He shows genuine interest in Morty's happiness and growth. By the end of the episode, Rick has merged back into his normal self, a complex mix of healthy Rick and toxic Rick traits. But something has changed. He's experienced what it feels like to be purely healthy, and that knowledge stays with him. He's also seen what his toxicity looks like when it operates alone, and that awareness matters too.
The episode suggests that real growth might come from understanding both sides of ourselves. Healthy Rick serves as a guide to what Rick could become, but the episode makes clear that the path forward involves integration, both versions working together rather than elimination of one or the other. Toxic Rick and healthy Rick together show us that mentorship sometimes comes from within, from the parts of ourselves that we keep buried under layers of hurt and defensive behavior. Healthy Rick proves that Rick is capable of being supportive, encouraging, and emotionally intelligent. Toxic Rick shows that even his worst behaviors stem from real feelings and genuine attachments. The real controversy here is that the episode suggests Rick's toxic behavior might be partially by choice. He has both healthy Rick and toxic Rick inside him. He just usually chooses to express the toxic side because it feels safer than vulnerability. After seeing what a better version of himself could be, Rick then finds out that even the worst version of himself was never really in control, pushing him to fear that maybe he isn't either.
Rick's world made perfect sense until it completely fell apart. He was the smartest person in the universe, period. One family, one Morty, one reality where his genius reigned supreme. His garage was his kingdom, and nobody questioned the king. Then armed Ricks kicked down his door during breakfast. Season 1, Episode 10, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, drags Rick kicking and screaming into a reality he never wanted to face. 27 Ricks across different dimensions have been murdered, and the Council of Ricks thinks our Rick did it. They haul him to the Citadel of Ricks, this massive headquarters where thousands of Rick variants have formed their own government. Walking through that Citadel destroys everything Rick believed about himself. He always thought he was special, the one true
true genius in a universe full of idiots. But suddenly he's surrounded by cowboy Ricks, robot Ricks, alien Ricks, each one convinced of their own brilliance. Rick realizes he might just be another face in an infinite crowd. The council represents everything Rick despises about safety and compromise. These Ricks gave up their independence because they were scared. They formed a government to protect themselves from other governments. They chose security over freedom, and Rick can see exactly how pathetic that makes them. But their existence forces Rick to confront uncomfortable questions. If there are infinite Ricks, what makes him special? If other versions of himself can make different choices, what does that say about his own decisions? When Rick escapes to hunt down the real killer, he finds evil Rick operating from a dome covered in tortured Mortys. This version takes everything Rick represents and pushes it to pure horror. Where Rick uses Morty as camouflage because Morty's brainwaves hide his genius, evil Rick created a matrix of suffering Mortys for the same purpose. Evil Rick embodies Rick without any pretense of caring. He tortures Mortys because it works. He kills other Ricks because they're in his way. He's Rick with all the pain and complexity stripped away, leaving only cold efficiency. Somehow, this makes him more terrifying than if he were just angry or sad. But then the Mortys rebel and tear evil Rick apart, revealing wires in his brain. The most evil Rick in the multiverse was being controlled by his Morty the entire time. Evil Rick was actually a controlled Rick. Evil Morty had been pulling the strings from behind an eye patch, making the smartest person in the universe dance like a puppet.
This revelation shatters Rick's understanding of intelligence and power. Throughout the episode, Rick treated Morty exactly like evil Rick did, as human camouflage, as a tool, as expendable protection. Rick openly calls Morty a perfect, impenetrable suit of human armor because he's as dumb as I am smart. But if evil Morty could control evil Rick completely, turning him into a controlled Rick, what does that say about Rick's relationship with his own Morty? The supposedly inferior person was actually running the show, and the genius never even knew it. Evil Rick controlled Rick represents the ultimate nightmare scenario for Rick. Here's a version of himself who thought he was making his own choices, who believed his cruelty and intelligence made him superior, but was actually just following orders the entire time. Evil Rick wasn't even really evil by choice. He was programmed to be evil by someone he considered beneath him. The tragedy of evil Rick controlled Rick is that he believed he was the mastermind. He thought his ruthlessness came from his own strength and decisions. Finding out he was just a remote-controlled puppet makes everything he did meaningless. He was never really making choices at all. This discovery forces Rick to question everything about agency and control. Evil Rick looked exactly like any other Rick. Brilliant, cruel, independent. But underneath, he was just hardware being operated by someone else's software. The controlled Rick shows that even the most evil, most confident version of Rick can be manipulated without knowing it. Evil Rick controlled Rick also reveals how vulnerable Rick's intelligence can be. All that genius, all that scientific knowledge, all that supposed superiority, and he still got turned into someone else's tool. The wires in his brain show that even Rick's most defining characteristic, his intellect, can be hijacked and redirected. After this experience, Rick can never go back to his old certainties. He's still brilliant, still dangerous, still the smartest person in most rooms. But now he operates with the knowledge that intelligence alone might not be enough. The controlled Rick proves that even genius has blind spots. Even the smartest person can become someone else's puppet. Evil Rick serves as a warning about what happens when you stop paying attention to who's really in charge. He thought he was the one calling the shots, making the plans, deciding who lives and dies. In reality, he was just executing someone else's program. This version of Rick forces our Rick to become more paranoid, more aware that his autonomy might be under threat. The controlled Rick shows that manipulation can be so complete that the victim never suspects anything. Even when evil Rick was torturing Mortys and killing other Ricks, he genuinely believed these were his own choices. The evil Rick marks the end of Rick's comfortable assumption that his intelligence makes him immune to manipulation. Here's proof that even the most ruthless, most evil version of Rick can be turned into someone else's remote-controlled weapon. But confronting this possibility also makes Rick more determined to maintain his agency. Seeing what happened to evil Rick, how completely his autonomy was stripped away without him even knowing, makes Rick more vigilant about protecting his own free will. The controlled Rick represents everything Rick fears most, losing himself while thinking he's still in control. After seeing those wires in evil Rick's brain, Rick can never again assume that his choices are entirely his own. After realizing he might not be in control of his own mind, Rick enters a world built entirely by himself and still finds nothing but corruption, failure, and lies. If you're enjoying the video so far,
don't forget to leave a like. Rick thought he was the smartest person in the universe until he discovered he was just one of thousands. The Council of Ricks shattered his delusion of uniqueness, but it also revealed something darker. What happens when infinite versions of the same genius try to work together? Season 3, Episode 7, The Ricklantis Mix-Up takes us deep inside the Citadel of Ricks, showing us a society built entirely by and for Ricks. But this episode reveals that even when you remove every other variable, Ricks still create the same problems they complain about everywhere else: corruption, inequality, violence, and betrayal. The Council of Ricks represents every type of Rick you can imagine. There's Quantum Rick, Maximums Rickamus, and dozens of others, each one convinced of their own superiority while participating in a system that proves they're all basically the same. These Ricks formed their government because they were scared of other governments but ended up creating something even worse. What makes this episode brilliant is how it shows that the Council of Ricks operates exactly like every corrupt political system Rick claims to hate. They have elections that mean nothing, police who take bribes, factories that exploit workers, and shadow councils that make the real decisions. The Ricks, who were supposed to be too smart for regular society, ended up recreating all of society's worst aspects. The various council Ricks serve different functions, but they all share the same fundamental flaw. They believe being Rick makes them special while proving they're completely ordinary. Quantum Rick thinks his scientific knowledge makes him fit to govern. Maximums Rickamus believes his experience gives him wisdom, but they're all just variations on the same theme of intellectual arrogance combined with emotional immaturity. Rick J22 in the Wafer Factory shows us what happens to Ricks who challenge the system. He works for 15 years stamping cookies, watching other Ricks get promoted over him until he finally snaps and kills his supervisor. The factory produces simple Rick wafers by keeping one Rick trapped in a loop of happiness, feeding off his joy to flavor cookies. This represents how the Council of Ricks literally consumes the best parts of themselves to maintain their system. When Rick J22 takes Simple Rick hostage and demands a portal gun to escape, he thinks he's finally taking control of his life. Rick D. Sanchez III shows up pretending to be sympathetic, telling him he's more Rick than the others, offering him freedom and a new life. But it's all a setup. They shoot Rick J22 and plug him into the same machine that was torturing Simple Rick, using his moment of hope and rebellion to flavor their new Freedom Wafer line. This storyline reveals how the Council operates. They don't just suppress rebellion, they commodify it. They turn resistance into a product. Rick J22's genuine anger at being exploited becomes just another flavor of wafer for other Ricks to consume. Meanwhile, Cop Rick and Cop Morty show us how the Council's law enforcement works. Cop Morty has become everything wrong with police corruption. He takes bribes, uses excessive force, and calls other Mortys slurs. But here's the twist. Cop Morty is the one with all the connections and knowledge, while Cop Rick is the naive newcomer who still believes in doing the right thing. When they raid the Mortytown locos, Cop Rick tries to show compassion to a crying Morty, only to get stabbed. Cop Morty consoles him by saying it's okay to put faith in Mortys, just the right ones. Then Cop Morty blows up the building with the suspects inside and lies about what happened. When Cop Rick tries to arrest Big Morty for corruption, Cop Morty kills both Big Morty and tries to kill Cop Rick, forcing Rick to shoot his own partner. This storyline shows how the Council's system corrupts everyone who participates in it. Even the Mortys become enforcers of Rick oppression. Cop Morty has internalized Rick's supremacy so completely that he commits violence against other Mortys to maintain the system. The election subplot reveals the Council's political theater. Candidate Morty runs for president against various Rick candidates, each one representing a different type of political stereotype. When candidate Morty actually starts gaining support by talking about real issues, campaign manager Morty gets nervous and suggests he drop out. But candidate Morty's success leads to his assassination attempt by his own campaign manager, who has been given secret files showing that candidate Morty is actually Evil Morty. The assassination fails. Evil Morty wins the election and immediately executes all the Shadow Council Ricks who thought they were really in charge. Evil Morty's rise to power represents the ultimate corruption of the council system. He used their own democratic processes to gain control, then eliminated everyone who might oppose him. The floating bodies at the end of the episode, campaign manager Morty, investigator Rick, all the Shadow Council members, show that even within a society of supposed geniuses, manipulation and violence determine who really holds power. Season 3, Episode 4, Vindicators 3, The Return of Worldender, shows us a different aspect of Rick's relationship with potential collaborators. The Vindicators are supposed to be heroes, but Rick sees them as pretentious frauds who take themselves too seriously. When drunk Rick creates elaborate death games for them, he's really testing whether they live up to their own hype. The Vindicators fail every challenge because they lack genuine connection to their supposed values. Supernova talks about justice while murdering her own teammates. The team falls apart due to personal drama and ego conflicts. They're just as petty and self-serving as anyone else, but they hide it behind superhero costumes and noble speeches. Both episodes show that Rick's problem with groups runs deeper than just antisocial behavior. Whether it's other Ricks or supposed heroes, every collective Rick encounters reveals the same pattern. High ideals corrupted by personal ambition, power structures that benefit those already in charge, and violence justified by claims of greater good. The Council of Ricks represents the ultimate failure of Rick's worldview. If even infinite versions of the smartest person in the universe can't create a functional society, what hope does anyone else have? But maybe that's exactly Rick's point. All societies are doomed to corruption because they're made up of people, and people are fundamentally selfish and stupid, even when those people happen to be Rick Sanchez. After seeing that even Ricks build corrupt systems, Rick faces something worse. A friend turned enemy who knows how to break him.
Rick thought his worst enemy would be some alien emperor or cosmic god. Turns out his nightmare has feathers and used to be his best friend. Season 4, Episode 10, Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry throws Rick into the worst fight of his life. Space Beth's war against the bugs leads them all to this massive planet-killing ship. Rick thinks he's gonna rescue everyone and be the hero. Instead, he walks into a room and sees the one thing that can actually break him. Phoenix Person stands there waiting. This used to be Bird Person, Rick's oldest friend, the guy who understood him better than anyone. But the Galactic Federation dug up his corpse, rebuilt him with robot parts, and turned him into their personal Rick-killing machine. Rick tries to be cool about it. Hey, remember me? I killed Tammy for you. But Phoenix Person just gets more pissed. Turns out the Federation messed with his brain so much that he actually loved Tammy. Rick killed the woman Phoenix Person thinks he was supposed to marry. Great job, Rick. This whole fight is basically Rick getting his ass kicked by his own past. Phoenix Person knows exactly how Rick fights because they used to fight together. He knows Rick's tricks, his weapons, his weak spots. The Federation took everything good about their friendship and turned it into the perfect way to hurt Rick. And Phoenix Person is strong, like really strong. He throws Rick through walls, blasts him with lasers, beats the crap out of him while Rick tries to crack jokes or talk his way out of it. Nothing works. For once, Rick faces someone who knows him completely and uses that knowledge to destroy him. The really messed up part is what this fight represents. Rick always pushes people away because he thinks they'll betray him eventually. Well, here's his proof. His best friend literally came back from the dead to murder him. Rick's worst fear about relationships just came true in the most literal way possible. Phoenix Person keeps beating Rick down while throwing their history in his face. Every adventure they had together, every time Rick ran away when things got hard, every time Rick chose being alone over being a good friend. Phoenix Person remembers it all and he's pissed about all of it. Rick starts bleeding everywhere. His robot guts are spilling out while Phoenix Person stomps on his organs. Rick is actually dying here and he knows it. The guy who always has a plan, always has an escape route, always finds a way to win. He's about to get murdered by his best friend. This is Rick's worst nightmare playing out in real time. The person who knew him best, who saw through his lies and still cared about him anyway, has become the thing that's gonna kill him. All of Rick's paranoia about friendship just got proven right in the worst possible way. The only reason Rick survives is because Jerry saves him. Jerry, the guy Rick makes fun of constantly, has to rescue Rick from his own friend. Jerry uses Tammy's dead body like a puppet to distract Phoenix Person long enough for Space Beth to shut him down. But even after they win, even after Rick brings Phoenix Person home hoping to fix him, his friend immediately tries to kill him again. Rick has to shut him down and just sits there in his garage staring at the broken pieces of someone he used to care about. Phoenix Person shows Rick what happens when you spend your whole life expecting people to hurt you. Eventually they do, but maybe it's because you pushed them away so hard that when they came back swinging. The Phoenix Person's Rick is Rick at his most broken. He's facing an enemy who used to be his friend, getting beaten up by someone who knows every one of his secrets. This Rick has to deal with the fact that his biggest fear about relationships, that they always end in betrayal, just became literally true. This version of Rick proves that sometimes the thing that destroys you comes wearing a familiar face. Sometimes your worst enemy is someone who used to love you, and sometimes the person who knows you best is the one who can hurt you most. Phoenix Person is what happens when Rick's emotional damage gets turned into an actual weapon and pointed right back at him. And the scariest part is, Rick probably deserved it. After getting torn apart by a friend who knew him best, Rick faces a different kind of defeat, one where he loses to love, family, and a selfie. After being hurt by his closest friend, Rick faces a tougher fight, losing to his own pride and the family he can't control. Rick thought he was above everyone, especially politicians. Then he met the one person more stubborn than him, the President of the United States. What started as a simple monster hunt turned into a battle that would change Rick forever. Season 3, Episode 10.
The Rickchurian Morty date begins with Rick and Morty getting called to handle some alien creature in the White House tunnels. They show up, blast the thing in about 2 seconds, then get bored and go home to play Minecraft. Classic Rick move. Do the job quickly, then ignore everything else. But the president takes this personally. He's been watching them through satellites, and he sees Rick and Morty just chilling at home instead of taking their government work seriously. When he calls them out, Rick basically tells him to go screw himself. The president treats them like employees, but Rick sees himself as doing the president a favor just by showing up. This fight reveals something crucial about Rick's character. He genuinely believes he's too important to be held accountable by anyone. When the president mentions that Rick and Morty break about 1,000 federal laws per day, Rick thinks that's actually pretty cool. He assumes the government just tolerates this because they know Rick is too powerful to arrest. The President Rick emerges during this conflict, the version of Rick who gets into a power struggle with the most powerful person on Earth. This Rick represents Rick's ego at its absolute peak. He believes he's untouchable, that he can insult world leaders and face zero consequences. But then things escalate in ways Rick never expected. When Rick and Morty show up in Brazil to investigate a tiny civilization, the president brings his own team to claim jurisdiction. Rick protests, so the president has them arrested with special restraints made of sanchesium, a fake element the government created just to mess with Rick. The fact that they named a fake element after Rick shows how much he's gotten under their skin, but it also shows Rick's influence has limits. He can break a lot of laws, but he can still get arrested when someone really wants to arrest him. Rick escapes pretty easily because, well, he made up sanchesium and posted about it on Wikipedia, but the president keeps escalating. When Rick solves the tiny civilization problem and even brokers peace between Israel and Palestine just to show off, the president declares war on Rick personally. This leads to an absolutely brutal fight through the White House. Rick kills Secret Service agents with some kind of instant death technology. The president brings out military robots, child soldiers, invisible troops, and even a satellite laser. They destroy huge chunks of the White House while beating each other senseless. The fight gets really personal really fast. Rick threatens to visit the president's mother. The president calls Rick a terrorist. They're both acting like children, but children with access to weapons of mass destruction. During all this chaos, Rick keeps insisting that Morty deserves a selfie with the president. This seems like a weird thing to focus on during a life or death battle, but it represents something deeper. Rick is fighting for Morty's dignity, for his grandson to be treated with respect. The controversial truth this episode reveals is that Rick actually cares more about Morty's feelings than his own ego. He could have just left, could have taken his family to a different dimension where none of this happened. Instead, he chooses to fight the President of the United States over a selfie. When Rick finally wins the fight and forces the president to agree to the selfie, Morty has disappeared. He calls Rick to say he stole the portal gun. The family is hiding from Rick, and he honestly could take or leave the selfie at this point. Rick spent all this time and energy fighting for something Morty never really wanted. This moment breaks Rick in a way that physical violence never could. He realizes he's been projecting his own need for respect onto Morty. The whole fight was about Rick's ego, not Morty's happiness. Rick assumed Morty wanted validation from powerful people because Rick craves that validation himself. Meanwhile, Beth and Jerry get back together after Beth's clone paranoia drives her to Jerry for comfort. The family chooses each other over Rick, and they hide from him because they think he might kill Beth if she's a clone. Rick's own family is afraid of him. Rick swallows his pride and asks the president for help finding his family. He promises to leave the president alone forever if he can just get his family back. This represents a massive shift for Rick. He's admitting he needs help, and he's willing to give up his power games for his relationships. When Rick finds his family, he shows up planning to kill Jerry because he thinks Jerry is the problem. But Beth defends Jerry, and Rick realizes he's lost. Jerry has won simply by being there, by being consistent, by loving Beth unconditionally, while Rick played complicated mind games. Rick makes the hardest choice of his life. He accepts Jerry back into the family. He gives up his position as the dominant force in the household and agrees to be just another family member. This is Rick's version of character growth, and it's painful to watch. The episode ends with Rick disguising himself as fly fishing Rick to make peace with the president. He pretends to be a different Rick who travels between dimensions, offering to help with future threats. Both Rick and the president get to save face while ending their conflict. President Rick represents Rick at a crossroads. He can keep fighting everyone who challenges his authority, or he can choose his family over his ego. The fight with the president forces Rick to realize that his power means nothing if he loses the people he actually cares about. This version of Rick discovers that sometimes winning means admitting admitting you were wrong. Sometimes being the smartest person in the universe means knowing when to stop being smart and start being human. Rick gets his family back, but only by accepting that he can't control them anymore. The real victory here comes from Rick choosing love over power, family over status, and humility over dominance. That's a harder fight than any battle with the president, and it's one Rick almost loses. Rick chooses family over power fighting the president, but after killing Rick Prime, he's left empty and lost, not knowing what to do next. So you finally killed Rick Prime, the guy who murdered your family. Now what? This is where Rick C137 finds himself after beating Rick Prime to death with his bare hands. The victory tastes like nothing. Empty, hollow. All those years hunting Rick Prime, all that rage, all that purpose, gone in an instant. And there's nothing that fills the void. The ending of Unmortrican shows us something we rarely see from Rick: complete emotional numbness. Evil Morty even calls it out, asks Rick how it feels, expecting some satisfaction. But Rick just stands there covered in Rick Prime's blood, looking like a man who just realized he spent his entire life chasing something that would never actually fix him. The 1,000-yard stare mirrors what Morty went through way back in Season 1, except Rick has decades more baggage and way fewer healthy coping mechanisms. Then Rick Fending Your Mort opens with Rick passed out drunk on the garage floor. This is peak post-revenge depression. The man literally has nothing left to live for. His entire identity was built around hunting Rick Prime, and now that Rick Prime is dead, who is he? Morty tries to cheer him up with those adventure cards, and Rick's response is telling. He flips out completely. This guy who used to live for chaos and adventure suddenly wants to audit everything, call in cosmic entities, prove Morty wrong about technicalities. Why? Because structure and rules feel safe when your whole world just collapsed. Here's the controversial truth nobody wants to admit. Rick was probably happier when he was hunting Rick Prime. At least then he had purpose. At least then his pain meant something. The revenge gave his suffering a direction, a goal, a reason to keep existing. Take that away and what's left? Just a broken old man who destroyed countless lives and relationships in pursuit of killing Rick Prime. Something that ultimately meant nothing. The observer audit becomes this weird metaphor for Rick's mental state. He's obsessing over details, trying to control every narrative, desperately attempting to prove that his adventures with Morty have meaning. But watch how he reacts to the clips. He's defensive, angry, constantly trying to explain away their mistakes. The man is having a full identity crisis in real time. What makes this even more brutal is how Rick treats the whole situation. When the observer starts showing embarrassing clips of the family, Rick just wants it to stop. The guy who used to thrive on chaos and humiliation suddenly wants peace and quiet. That's Trauma Response 101. When you've been through something devastating like finally killing Rick Prime, even normal stress becomes unbearable. The most telling moment comes when Rick admits to Morty that he appreciates what Morty was trying to do with the punch cards. For Rick to acknowledge Morty's emotional intelligence and actually thank him, that's character development born from rock bottom. When you lose everything that defined you, including your lifelong quest to kill Rick Prime, you start noticing the people who stuck around anyway. But here's where it gets interesting. Rick still defaults to control and manipulation. He tricks the observers by pretending to show a defensive clip, then turns their own technology against them. Even in his broken state, Rick's instinct is to be the smartest person in the room. The difference is now it feels desperate rather than confident. He's not showing off his intelligence, he's clinging to it as the only piece of his identity that still works after Rick Prime's death. The episode ends with Rick and Morty agreeing to go on adventures again, but pay attention to how Rick says it. There's no enthusiasm, no manic energy, just resignation, like a man going through the motions because he has literally nothing else to do. The adventure cards represent structure, routine, something to fill the empty hours where he used to be consumed by hunting Rick Prime. This version of Rick is dangerous in a completely different way than before. Rick Prime was dangerous because he was nihilistic and detached. Pre-revenge Rick C137 was dangerous because he was driven by rage and grief toward Rick Prime. But post-Rick Prime Rick, he's dangerous because he has nothing left to lose and no clear reason to keep existing. That's the kind of person who makes catastrophically bad decisions just to feel something. The scary part is how this emptiness might push Rick toward even worse behavior. When you have no moral center and no driving purpose after killing Rick Prime, what stops you from becoming Rick Prime yourself? Evil Morty warned about this. What happens after Rick kills Rick Prime? Maybe he kills himself next. Or maybe he becomes the very thing he spent his life hunting. Rick C137's aftermath after killing Rick Prime shows us the lie we tell ourselves about justice and closure. We think if we just get even, if we just make Rick Prime pay, everything will be okay. But revenge never fixes you. It just leaves you empty, wondering what the the hell you're supposed to do with the rest of your life when your entire reason for living just died with Rick Prime. After Rick loses all purpose with Rick Prime gone, he struggles to hold on to his true self when his mind starts slipping away. Rick Sanchez loves control. He controls dimensions, he controls people, and most importantly, he controls himself. But what happens when Rick loses control of who he is? Tiny Rick shows us the terrifying answer. When Summer begs Rick to help with a vampire problem at school, Rick initially refuses. The idea of going back to high school disgusts him, but then something changes his mind. Rick decides to transfer his consciousness into a teenage clone of himself, creating Tiny Rick. At first, this seems like the perfect solution. All of Rick's intelligence in a young, energetic body. The transformation happens quickly. Tiny Rick kills the vampire coach with ease, proving his competence. But then the real problem begins. Instead of returning to his old body immediately, Tiny Rick gets seduced by teenage life. He goes to parties, plays guitar, and becomes incredibly popular. The whole school loves him, and for the first time in decades, Rick experiences what it feels like to be genuinely liked without fear. Here's where things get disturbing. Tiny Rick starts forgetting who he really is. The teenage brain begins overriding Rick's adult consciousness, burying his deeper thoughts and memories. Summer notices this first when she sees Tiny Rick's artwork. Desperate messages like, "Help me, Morty and Summer," hidden in what appears to be normal teenage angst. When Tiny Rick performs songs at parties, the lyrics are literal cries for help. "Let me out. What you see is not the same person as me. My life's a lie. I'm not who you're looking at." The episode reveals something profound about identity. Rick's cynicism, his awareness of death, his cosmic perspective, these things that make him miserable also make him who he is. The teenage brain wants to suppress these dark thoughts, creating a wall around them. But without his darkness, Rick becomes hollow. Tiny Rick is popular and happy, but he loses everything that makes Rick himself. Summer realizes the danger while Morty gets distracted by his newfound social status. Jessica finally talks to him because of Tiny Rick's popularity. This creates a fascinating conflict. Summer wants to save Rick, while Morty wants to preserve his own happiness. The episode shows how selfish people can be when their interests conflict with doing the right thing. The crisis peaks when Tiny Rick gets expelled after Summer plants evidence in his locker. But instead of returning to his old body, Tiny Rick turns violent. He tries to destroy Rick's original body permanently, essentially committing murder-suicide. This scene is genuinely frightening because we see Rick completely lost to himself. When Rick finally returns to his original body, he's changed. He immediately goes to his basement and destroys all his other clone bodies from Operation Phoenix. This is significant. Rick abandons his backup plan for immortality. He accepts that his current body and life are what he has, and that trying to escape aging or death only leads to losing himself. The episode works because it asks a simple question. Would you rather be happy or be yourself? Most people would choose happiness, but Rick chooses authenticity. He would rather be miserable and real than happy and fake. This makes Rick both admirable and tragic. Tiny Rick also reveals Rick's deepest fear, losing his identity. Rick can handle physical death, but the idea of becoming someone else terrifies him. The episode suggests that our flaws and pain are not obstacles to overcome, but essential parts of who we are. Without his cynicism and depression, Rick becomes just another teenager. The vampire subplot serves as a perfect parallel. Vampires are creatures that have lost their humanity in exchange for power and immortality. Tiny Rick faces a similar choice. Keep the benefits of youth but lose his essential self. The difference is that Rick chooses to remain human, flaws and all. This episode transforms how we see Rick's character. His depression and nihilism are not just personality quirks. They are core parts of his identity that he will fight to preserve. Tiny Rick proves that even Rick Sanchez has lines he will not cross, and losing himself is where he draws that line. Rick losing himself as Tiny Rick leads directly to him facing his biggest fears and learning how to really care. Rick Sanchez has always been running from pain, from responsibility, from genuine connection. But after 7 seasons of chaos and destruction, something fundamental shifts in Fear No Mort. This episode shows us a Rick who has finally stopped running and learned how to be present for the people who matter most. The fear hole represents the ultimate test of character. When Rick and Morty discover this mysterious pit that forces people to confront their deepest fears, Rick's initial reaction is typical. He walks away. He refuses to engage with anything that might challenge his carefully constructed emotional walls. But when Morty jumps in anyway, Rick follows without hesitation. This simple action reveals everything about how Rick has changed. changed. Inside the fear hole, Morty experiences a nightmare version of reality where Rick reunites with Diane, but slowly wastes away in the process. What makes this sequence devastating is watching Morty realize that his greatest fear involves Rick's happiness potentially meaning his own abandonment. The fake Rick in the fear hole exploits this insecurity, making Morty believe that Rick would choose Diane over him every single time. But the real transformation happens when Morty finally escapes and faces the actual Rick waiting outside. When Morty asks if he's irreplaceable, Rick gives an answer that would have been impossible from earlier versions of himself. Instead of deflecting with sarcasm or cruelty, Rick responds with, "Define irreplaceable," a gentle way of acknowledging Morty's worth without completely abandoning his scientific worldview. This moment captures perfectly how Rick has evolved. He has learned to balance his intellectual honesty with emotional intelligence. Rick could have said, "Yes, you're irreplaceable," to make Morty feel better, but that would have been a lie. He could have said, "Nobody is irreplaceable," to maintain his nihilistic consistency, but that would have been cruel. Instead, he finds a middle ground that validates Morty's feelings while staying true to his own nature. The episode's most powerful symbol comes at the very end. After Morty shares his traumatic experience in the fear hole, Rick quietly returns to the bathroom and places a photo of Morty on the bulletin board, the wall reserved for people who conquered their fears. Rick recognizes that Morty achieved something extraordinary, and he wants to honor that accomplishment. This gesture reveals the depth of Rick's transformation. The old Rick would have mocked the very idea of a fear-conquering wall. He would have dismissed the entire concept as meaningless sentiment. But this Rick understands that meaning comes from the connections we make and the people we choose to celebrate. By placing Morty's photo on that wall, Rick is essentially saying, "This matters because you matter." What makes Rick's evolution so compelling is that he maintains his essential character while fundamentally changing his priorities. He still makes crude jokes and maintains his scientific perspective. He still sees through illusions and refuses to be manipulated by false hope. But now these traits serve a different purpose. They protect and support the people he loves rather than isolating him from them. The Fear Hole episode also shows how Rick has learned to recognize when someone needs help versus when they need space. Throughout Morty's ordeal, Rick waits patiently outside, trusting that Morty can handle the challenge while remaining ready to assist if needed. This represents a massive shift from the Rick who used to drag Morty into dangerous situations without considering the psychological consequences. Rick's relationship with fear itself has also evolved. Earlier seasons showed us a Rick who seemed fearless because he had numbed himself to almost everything. But this Rick acknowledges fear as a natural and sometimes valuable emotion. When Morty begs him not to enter the fear hole himself, Rick listens. He recognizes that some battles are worth avoiding, especially when the cost might be losing the progress he has made. The episode suggests that Rick's greatest achievement has nothing to do with science or interdimensional travel. His real accomplishment is learning how to be present in someone else's life without overwhelming them. He has discovered the delicate balance between caring enough to stay involved and respecting boundaries enough to let others grow. This version of Rick represents something revolutionary in the show's mythology. For the first time, we see a Rick who has processed his trauma enough to function as a positive force in his family's life. He has moved beyond using his intelligence as a weapon and started using it as a tool for understanding and connection. The photo on the bulletin board becomes a promise. Rick is choosing to stay engaged with the messy, complicated work of being someone's grandfather. He has returned from his long journey through grief and revenge with something more valuable than any scientific discovery: the wisdom to recognize what truly matters and the courage to protect it.
Now let's talk about how smart is every Rick and Morty character. From Morty nearly destroying the timeline over a crush, to Rick inventing an entire multiverse just to avoid being wrong. This is the full breakdown of how smart every character is in Rick and Morty, ranked from Jerry to smartest. Starting with Jerry Smith. He's never been the smartest person in the room, but he's too oblivious to ever notice that. While everyone else in the Rick and Morty universe struggles with the mind-bending complexities of interdimensional travel, Jerry's biggest challenge is figuring out how to use a Meeseeks box without causing a citywide hostage situation. His life represents one long, unbroken streak of self-sabotage. In a universe where Rick Sanchez can create entire civilizations and Morty has developed survival instincts to navigate cosmic horrors, Jerry is spectacularly and almost impressively incompetent at the most mundane tasks. From the very beginning of Rick and Morty, Jerry Smith was established as the family's weak link. He's known for struggling with employment and failing to connect with his family, but he's also capable of heroism in times of crisis. In fact, he's saved his family on rare occasions.
Jerry's nature to give up in tough situations became problematic when he asked a blue humanoid creature to help him improve his golf game. And upon realizing that he was bad at golf, he quit trying to pursue his goals. This could also possibly be the reason why Jerry can't get a job or can't keep a job for a long time, because he always gives up halfway. The Meeseeks were specifically designed to help people with simple tasks. Rick warned the Smith family to keep their tasks simple because if a Meeseeks isn't given a purpose at the beginning of its existence, it seems to default to taking the purpose of the Meeseeks before it. Beth asks her Meeseeks to help her be a more complete woman. Summer wants to become popular at school, but Jerry asks for something more straightforward, taking 2 strokes off his golf game. What should have been the simplest request becomes an existential nightmare that threatens the entire family's safety because being bad at golf and his unwillingness to practice made for an impossible combination. This was the moment when Jerry's fundamental misunderstanding of cause and effect became a life-threatening situation for everyone around him. What follows is one of the most chaotic sequences in Rick and Morty history, and it's all Jerry's fault. However, Jerry struggles to improve at golf despite the coaching from his Meeseeks. Jerry is ready to give up, but his Meeseeks can't stop existing until it completes its task and decides to summon another Meeseeks to help. The situation spirals completely out of control, as Jerry's refusal to acknowledge his own limitations creates a multiplying crisis as Mr. Meeseeks hits the button on the Meeseeks box and another Mr. Meeseeks appears. The beautiful irony here is that Jerry actually admits he sucks, but instead of working to improve, he just accepts it as an immutable fact of the universe. The longer the Meeseeks stay alive, the more sanity they begin to lose. And Jerry, being Jerry, doesn't seem to grasp the urgency of the situation. While Beth and Summer's Meeseeks complete their tasks and disappear within hours, Jerry's incompetence creates what amounts to an interdimensional mental health crisis. When Jerry decides he's had enough and leaves the increasingly desperate Meeseeks to go to dinner with Beth, the situation reaches its most ridiculous point. Jerry goes to dinner with Beth, telling the whining Meeseeks that they are more worried about his golf game than he is. This is peak Jerry. Create a problem, make it worse through negligence, then wash his hands of responsibility when things spiral out of control. The climax was when the Meeseeks stormed the restaurant where Jerry and Beth were dining, driven to complete madness by him. The horde of Mr. Meeseeks descend on the restaurant while Jerry and Beth escape into the restaurant's freezer, and the Mr. Meeseeks begin taking hostages to force him out. The man who couldn't improve his golf swing by 2 strokes has now created a hostage situation. So he does the most Jerry thing ever and asks why he's mediocre, as if it's something that happened to him rather than because of who he is as a person. The resolution comes when Jerry finally demonstrates that his golf swing has improved by using a makeshift setup in the restaurant. Jerry comes out from the freezer and uses a severed pipe and tomato to prove that his swing has improved. The Mr. Meeseeks celebrate and disappear, all except for one stickler Mr. Meeseeks who takes a hostage and asks to see Jerry's short game. But Jerry couldn't quite get it right because there's always one more thing he hasn't considered. The family's reaction tells us everything we need to know about Jerry's place in their world. They went crazy when they couldn't take 2 strokes off Jerry's golf game. He felt terrible, and Rick's dismissal cut straight to the point by saying it's simply factual. Jerry's incompetence is so well established that nearly causing multiple deaths over golf lessons barely registers as unusual. The Meeseeks incident pretty much covers Jerry's role throughout the series. His fundamental problem is that he overthinks simple things while completely missing complex realities. He can intellectualize the concept of relaxation being paradoxical, but he can't grasp that asking magical creatures to fix his golf game might have consequences. This pattern repeats throughout the series. When the Galactic Federation took over Earth and humanity slipped into full-blown dystopia, Jerry Smith saw an opportunity to climb the corporate ladder instead of protecting his family. Instead of asking why the aliens wanted him or what they planned to do with humanity, Jerry leaned into the fantasy that he was finally special.
His unemployment becomes a recurring theme that illustrates his approach to problem solving perfectly. He can never seem to catch a break or a job. However, one theory suggests that it's possible his specific job in the Galactic Federation contributed to his inability to find work on Earth. Essentially, because of Jerry's background in marketing, the Galactic Federation used this to its advantage to create content for the masses. In the episode Something Ricked This Way Comes, Jerry's insecurities lead to helping his son Morty on a science project, to which he stubbornly refuses to concede that Pluto is no longer a planet. This ends up with him and Morty being abducted to Pluto. Jerry's scientific method was, if experts disagree with what makes him feel good, the experts must be wrong.
That's right. It's possible to disagree in science, Morty. Pluto was a planet. Some committee of fancy assholes disagree. I disagree back.
Jerry's defining trait is that he doesn't ask questions because answers might ruin the fantasy. When faced with a talking cat that clearly has disturbing secrets, Jerry didn't panic or call for help. He didn't even ask how or why the cat could speak. He just accepted it and agreed to go on a spontaneous vacation to Florida. Later, when Rick scanned the cat's mind and saw something so horrifying he could barely speak, Jerry didn't want to know. He willingly had the memory wiped because he couldn't handle the discomfort of knowing the truth. This demonstrates what makes Jerry the dumbest character in Rick and Morty. He thinks being chosen means being right. He thinks doing nothing is the safest move. And worst of all, he thinks failure is just bad luck and never his own fault. Jerry consistently chooses comfort over growth, validation over truth, and denial over self-reflection. Jerry's episode with the Meeseeks is one of the show's most perfect character studies that shows exactly how someone can turn a simple request into a life-threatening disaster through sheer incompetence. His estimated IQ, 85. Below average intelligence combined with absolute zero self-awareness and a pathological aversion to learning. Jerry represents the dangerous intersection of stupidity and stubborn confidence. If this is how low the bar starts, just wait till we get to the characters who think cloning themselves makes them emotionally stable. Hit subscribe now if you're buckled in. But his journey from unemployment to cosmic irrelevance is just getting started. Because next up, we have a character who might actually be smart enough to recognize their own limitations, unlike our poor, oblivious Jerry. Mr. Poopy Butthole. The more you look at him, the more it becomes clear that Mr. Poopy Butthole is a sight for sore eyes. This character exists to react. He pops in, screams something cheerful, gets shot, and then vanishes until the next cameo. But if you string his choices together long enough, it reveals a pattern of the kind of impulsive behavior we can only expect from Rick. Mr. Poopy Butthole operates like someone reading cue cards for the first time, drifting through dangerous situations without understanding the stakes. He survives by accident and collapses the moment anyone asks him to take initiative. His defining characteristic shows his complete inability to plan ahead or learn from catastrophic experiences. Wayne Poopy Butthole, more commonly referred to as Mr. Poopy Butthole and formerly Professor Poopy Butthole, is a longtime family friend of the Smith family and a recurring character in Rick and Morty. He's mostly shown breaking the fourth wall during the show and is the only other character to do this besides Rick and others on certain occasions. He often addresses the audience in post-credit scenes following a season finale, where he talks about what just happened in the episode as well as his personal life before encouraging the audience to tune in for the next season. What makes Mr. Poopy Butthole fascinating is how he processes trauma and crisis. Rather than developing coping mechanisms or learning from experiences, he simply resets his emotional state and soldiers on as if nothing fundamental has changed. His happy-go-lucky personality stays the same throughout the series, suggesting either profound wisdom or complete disconnection from reality. The perfect example of Mr. Poopy Butthole's reactive stupidity comes from the Total Recall episode, where the family faces an invasion of memory-implanting parasites. The Smith household becomes ground zero for distinguishing between real family friends and alien threats who plant false memories. The tension builds as paranoia spreads and family members start killing anyone who seems too good to be true. Beth becomes increasingly suspicious. Rick arms everyone, and the situation escalates toward violence. Mr. Poopy Butthole exists right in the middle of this chaos, cheerful and familiar, but somehow off. You could even assume he's another parasite because he appears too perfectly placed to be coincidental. The setup makes him look like an obvious target for elimination, especially when everyone else is being systematically murdered for being suspicious. During the lockdown, Mr. Poopy Butthole shows no awareness of the danger surrounding him. Rick presses a button on his watch, and all doors and windows in the house are sealed off by blast shields. Instead of recognizing this as a life-threatening situation, Mr. Poopy Butthole treats it like a minor inconvenience. His response to being trapped during a parasite hunt demonstrates how disconnected he really is from reality. While everyone else is getting paranoid, Mr. Poopy Butthole is still obliviously cheerful while also sharing irrelevant memories and making himself seem even more suspicious. At this point, Beth was convinced that Mr. Poopy Butthole must be a parasite, so she shoots him point blank. Photos become the family's method for determining who's real, and when Beth scrolls through her images, she discovers that Mr. Poopy Butthole isn't in any of the photos. This should have been his moment to explain, to provide evidence, to save himself through quick thinking. Instead, Mr. Poopy Butthole turns the accusation around without understanding that he's making himself look even more suspicious by telling her that she's not in any of his either, essentially confirming Beth's suspicion, so she brings out one of Rick's laser weapons and shoots Mr. Poopy Butthole in the midsection, which throws him over the room onto a wall. The family freaks out as he starts bleeding, proving he wasn't a parasite. This scene shows exactly how Mr. Poopy Butthole operates. He drifts through dangerous situations without understanding the consequences. He had no plan for surviving a parasite hunt, no strategy for proving he's not one of them, and no awareness that being the most suspicious-looking person in the room might get him shot. After the credits, we see Mr. Poopy Butthole recovering inside the hospital. And rather than demanding justice, pressing charges, or even seeking an explanation for why Beth shot him, Mr. Poopy Butthole simply forgives them and moves on. His immediate reaction to trauma shows the reactive nature that defines his entire existence. His entire story arc reveals the fundamental limitation of reactive intelligence. After being absent for several seasons, Mr. Poopy Butthole returns with a cane, a limp, and a family we've never seen before. He talks about his downfall, casually revealing that he lost his job, got addicted to pills, and drove his wife and son away. The weird part is that he blames the audience. No one asked for this update, but he just appears, spills his guts to the camera, and then disappears again. The pattern continues in almost every appearance. In Season 4, he appears as Professor Poopy Butthole in front of a small gathering of college students. They all attack him almost right away, and we see an incredible display of agile martial arts as he dodges punches in slow motion and brutally defeats them all with his cane. His Season 7 appearance shows complete deterioration, though. Mr. Poopy Butthole shows up completely unhinged, openly suicidal, and clinging to whatever scraps of meaning he can find. He takes a job teaching, gets fired, and blames everyone but himself. The fact that he narrates his own misery demonstrates how disconnected he becomes from cause and effect. Mr. Poopy Butthole's sudden selfishness in Season 7 possibly comes from the fact that he's probably the variant from the Parmesan dimension, rather than the same character we've been following. The most telling aspect of his character development shows his complete inability to break destructive cycles. Each appearance follows the same pattern. He arrives cheerfully, gets caught up in circumstances beyond his control, suffers consequences, and then processes the trauma as if it happened to someone else. His relationship with the fourth wall breaking reveals another one of his limitations. Mr. Poopy Butthole often addresses the audience in post-credit scenes, but unlike Rick's sophisticated meta-commentary, his observations are surface level and disconnected from deeper understanding. He means well and suffers genuinely, but lacks the intelligence to protect himself or improve his circumstances. It's almost like watching someone try to navigate a hurricane with an umbrella while being unprepared for the reality he's facing. Mr. Poopy Butthole's estimated IQ, 88, capable of basic social interaction and surprisingly effective in physical confrontations, but completely unable to anticipate consequences or learn from repeated trauma. His reactive intelligence keeps him going, but he's never safe. He's brilliantly incompetent, at least when compared to our next character, who somehow manages to make wrong decisions even when handed the right answers. Beth Smith. Her intelligence exists beyond question. She's one of the smartest people in the family. She's a trained surgeon, a confident leader, and quick to assert dominance in almost any conversation. But intelligence alone doesn't lead to smart decisions. With Beth, her biggest flaw is how she constantly mistakes control for clarity. She doesn't want to understand the situation. She wants to win it. Most of her bad decisions come from that warped priority. Beth processes trauma by repackaging it into pride. Instead of pulling herself out of toxic situations, she digs deeper into them to prove she's strong enough to survive. That might work with horses, but it doesn't work in a family with Rick. Her intellect becomes weaponized to protect her ego rather than improve her life, creating a dangerous combination of high intelligence and complete emotional dysfunction. She's the third antagonist of Rick and Morty, the daughter of Rick C137, Jerry's wife and Summer and Morty's mother. She also works as a veterinarian at the St. Equus Hospital, specializing in horse surgery, a job she internally feels to be beneath her and is often defensive when her career is compared to human medicine. Several episodes have dealt with Beth's deep dissatisfaction with her life, stemming from her belief that she has settled in her marriage, family, and job. As an adult, she wanted to work as a cardiac surgeon, but that never happened because she went to prom with Jerry and got pregnant with her first child and only daughter, Summer. She may wish she had been able to continue her medical education to become a real doctor, but in reality, Beth has a superiority complex. She believes she is above others as a way of hiding her insecurities. Her genius father's clear preference for her over her idiot husband, as Rick likes to put it, has in turn fed her feelings of superiority, especially towards Jerry. Beth's intelligent stupidity comes from her relationship with therapy and self-reflection for starters. In Pickle Rick, the family attends therapy without Rick, and Beth spends the entire session trying to prove that their dysfunction is sophisticated rather than harmful and just wants to win the session. Things start to escalate as Dr. Wong attempts to address the family's real problems. Beth deflects every observation about her closed-off emotional state, claiming it's better than making your problems other people's problems. When Dr. Wong suggests that Rick and Beth's shared aversion to emotion and vulnerability is at the root of the family's problems, Beth immediately goes on the defensive. Dr. Wong asks simple, leading questions about why Rick turned himself into a pickle to avoid therapy, and Beth just responds with justifications. She rationalizes the matter in order to avoid facing the painful truth that her father lied and proceeds to become hostile, treating the therapy session like a debate she needs to win at all costs. Beth's response tells you everything about who she is. Beth fails to consider her similarities with Rick and gets more defensive of Rick when Dr. Wong points out how Rick uses his intelligence to avoid getting in touch with his emotional side. This exchange shows Beth's fundamental problem. She confuses emotional unavailability with strength. Her intelligence tells her that Rick's behavior is destructive, but her emotional needs override her rational assessment. She chooses to admire Rick's toxic independence because acknowledging his dysfunction would mean confronting her own. When Dr. Wong finishes her analysis of Rick's pattern of using intelligence to justify avoiding emotional work, Rick stays silent and actually processes the feedback. But Beth just ignores the entire session. After they leave, she and Rick mock Dr. Wong and make plans to go drinking, completely ignoring Morty and Summer's advice of returning to therapy. The pattern continues in The ABCs of Beth, where Rick reveals her childhood sociopathic tendencies. Beth's response reveals her intelligence-driven rationalization when she is presented with proof of her unsettling childhood behavior, such as Rick's list of weapons she asked for as a child. Following the therapy session, Beth's reaction shows her complete inability to process criticism constructively. Rather than considering Dr. Wong's insights, she treats the entire experience as validation of her superiority. Her dismissal reveals how she uses her intelligence to maintain her defensive barriers. Beth's response also reveals her basic avoidance of responsibility when Rick gives her the option to clone herself and leave Earth. She agrees but deliberately chooses not to know which version stayed behind because she says it's empowering, that she trusts herself either way. But deep down, she's dodging accountability, because she would be angry at herself for being so cowardly if she knew she stayed, and she would question her parenting if she knew she had left. Not knowing gives her plausible deniability. This decision reveals Beth's intelligence working against her own growth. She's smart enough to recognize the escape route Rick offers, clever enough to structure the arrangement to protect her ego, but too emotionally stunted to make an authentic choice about her life. Beth's pattern of using intelligence to avoid emotional growth creates cascading problems throughout her relationships. Her obsession with not being like her mother leads her to repeat the exact same dysfunctional patterns. She belittles Jerry the same way her mom belittled her dad. She stays in a loveless marriage out of inertia and pride. She drinks to cope, resents her kids, and lashes out when she feels unappreciated, all while denying that anything's wrong. Her relationship with Jerry demonstrates how her intellectual superiority becomes emotional poison. Beth doesn't love Jerry. She's bored by him, frustrated with his mediocrity, and openly disgusted with his lack of courage. But every time she has the chance to leave him for good, she either hesitates or doubles back. She stays because walking away would mean admitting she wasted her youth on the wrong man, that she chose someone safe over someone challenging, that she made a mistake. When they do separate, Beth feels free for a moment but then spirals into an identity crisis. The Space Beth situation reveals the logical endpoint of her avoidance patterns. In A Rick Convenient Mort, we learn that Beth and Space Beth begin a romantic relationship with each other because they're the same person and no one else understands them. Beth is so desperate to be seen, so unwilling to admit she's emotionally isolated, that she literally starts dating herself. She justifies it as self-care, a healthy bond, and a way to feel whole. But what it really does is expose her inability to form authentic connections with others. Even when Rick endangers Morty, destabilizes their household, and reveals everything that makes her feel secure, Beth sticks by him. She defends him, excuses him, places his intellect above his destructiveness, and his approval above her own instincts. Her superiority complex, believing herself at times to be above others as a way of hiding her insecurities, creates a feedback loop where her intelligence reinforces her emotional problems rather than solving them. She confuses control with strength, refuses help because needing it would imply weakness, and surrounds herself with people she can either fix or dominate because equals would threaten her illusion of superiority. All in all, she represents the most tragic kind of wasted potential. Someone brilliant enough to recognize her problems, but too emotionally damaged to fix them. It's like watching a gifted surgeon operate on everyone except herself, using all her skills to maintain the wounds that are slowly killing her. Her intelligence could be her salvation, but she's chosen pride instead. Her estimated IQ, 130, highly intelligent with strong analytical abilities and medical training, but her emotional dysfunction and pathological need for control prevent her from applying that intelligence to her own life. There's a very similar character to her with the same kind of pride, but she owns it, unlike Beth, who isn't willing to question herself. She's a surgeon with abandonment issues and a clone somewhere in orbit, and we're still only halfway up the ladder. Click subscribe before the smarter ones start destroying timelines. Space Beth. Space Beth acts like she escaped all of regular Beth's baggage, but the truth reveals she just repackaged it into aggression. She's sharper in a fight, quicker to act, and more decisive in a crisis. But where regular Beth hides behind control and pride, Space Beth hides behind motion.
She solves her problems by outrunning them, blasting them, or pretending they don't exist. For someone who claims to be free, Space Beth spends a lot of time proving she's still stuck in the same psychological loops, only with cooler boots and a bigger gun. Space Beth doesn't just want to be independent, she wants to be defined by it. Every sarcastic jab and smug smile becomes another brick in the wall she's building to avoid the deeper question. If freedom made her happy, why did she come back? Because deep down, Space Beth doesn't want to be separate. She wants to be chosen. Her intelligence gets channeled into elaborate justifications for avoiding emotions that could actually free her, much like Rick. Space Beth is a major character in Rick and Morty who's either the original Beth Smith from Dimension C131 or a clone of her. At the end of the ABCs of Beth, Rick made a clone of Beth with all her memories and, unable to decide whether or not he wanted his daughter in his life, purposefully had their positions shuffled so that he himself would not know which Beth was the clone. By the time of Star-Mort Return of the Jerry, Space Beth has gone on several space adventures to reach the most wanted status in the galaxy. She returns to Earth to murder Rick for lying to her, as well as the other Beth, but Rick makes her see the other Beth has a chip too. She appears to be vengeful of her father, though her hatred seems to have toned down by the end as she returns to live with her earthly counterpart and her family. Space Beth operates like someone whose entire identity revolves around the concept of having made the right choice. She brags about saving galaxies, dismisses Earth life as meaningless, and criticizes Beth for everything from parenting to clothing. But underneath all the confidence lives someone who desperately needs to feel like the better version of Beth. She measures her value against the woman who stayed behind, treating their relationship like a competition she has to keep winning. Space Beth's intelligence-driven self-deception comes from her re-entry into Earth dynamics. In Star-Mort Return of the Jerry, Space Beth gets involved in a battle between the New Galactic Federation and Rick's family with almost no hesitation. She flies straight into chaos, confronts Rick with a gun to his face, and assumes she's being hunted, which was actually based on a handful of assumptions. When Beth, who thinks Rick doesn't want her to return, finds the explosive device in her neck, the episode takes a different turn. Rather than seeking clarification or examining the complexity of the situation, she jumps to the conclusion that she's been betrayed. This reaction shows that she sees confrontation as clarity. Space Beth's approach to family conflict shows the same pattern of just acting on it instead of asking questions. When she learns about the other Beth's similar device, instead of recognizing this as evidence of Rick's impossible position, she treats it as some kind of manipulation that she's got to overcome with force. She follows the same pattern in Bethic Twinstinct when Space Beth returns for Thanksgiving. She makes her return to Earth with the confidence of a rebellious teen who finally moved out and got a haircut just to spite her parents. The build-up shows her systematically working to prove her superiority over regular Beth while desperately seeking validation for her life choices. The climactic moment of Space Beth's emotional dysfunction comes during her romantic involvement with regular Beth. Her relationship with Beth starts to develop after they bond over a bottle of Venusian wine after the dinner. Space Beth encourages Beth to be the kind of person she wants to be and not hold back, pointing out they can tell each other anything. What follows reveals the depth of Space Beth's psychological isolation by literally dating herself because they're the same person and no one else understands them. The beautiful tragedy here shows exactly how Space Beth operates. She cuts out the middleman and dates a version of herself who already knows the script. She tells herself it's love, but Space Beth chose the most emotionally safe partner imaginable and called it freedom. While Space Beth wants to take their relationship seriously, Beth still has feelings for Jerry and wants to stay with her family. Space Beth's response to that showed just how unstable she can get when she's rejected, and so she becomes territorial, starts insulting Jerry, and pressures Beth to abandon her life. But after Jerry figures out that his wife is having an affair with her alternate self, Space Beth shows her inability to process complex emotional situations.
She continues to belittle him throughout Bethic Twinstinct and encourages Beth to leave him permanently, showing no regard for his feelings on their relationship. She then went on to accuse him of being upset that it's about him, calling him a pervert when she finds out he enjoys watching them make out. But then something unexpected happens. She realizes that she's aroused by him, permitting it before having him join in. We all know what happens next. Space Beth's reaction to this resolution demonstrates her fundamental confusion about what she actually wants. Rather than recognizing this as a healthy compromise that allows everyone to get their needs met, she processes it as another victory in her ongoing competition with regular Beth. She can be heard saying she knows what Jerry likes, treating intimacy like another skill to master rather than a connection to experience. The aftermath reveals Space Beth's core problem. She treats discomfort like a threat. When emotional situations become complex or ambiguous, she either freezes or redirects into aggression. She'd rather fire a laser than admit she's lost. Space Beth's pattern of using motion to avoid reflecting creates cascading problems across all her relationships. For someone who constantly criticizes her father, Space Beth spends a suspicious amount of time trying to impress him. She acts detached when Rick doesn't recognize her, shrugging off his indifference like it doesn't sting. But the more time they spend together, the more obvious it becomes that Space Beth wants Rick to validate her decision to leave. She wants him to say she's the real one, or the better one, or the daughter he should have raised. Rick never gives her that validation. He avoids choosing. So Space Beth lashes out in subtler ways. She challenges his logic, competes with his tech, and flaunts her independence while hoping he'll chase her. For all her rebellion, she's still stuck in the same emotional orbit as regular Beth. She claims to be happy with her life and claims to have found purpose, but the moment she's back around her family, all of that starts to fade away. She becomes jealous of Beth's connection with the kids. She becomes territorial about Jerry. And in later episodes, she openly competes for affection and attention because she can't stand the idea of being the other Beth. In reality, she still wants the same things as her clone: to be loved, to be needed, and to matter more than Rick ever let her. She acts like she moved past her trauma, but in reality, she just weaponized it. In Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry, she immediately assumes the worst about Rick's intentions and treats every situation like a battle to be won rather than a problem to be solved. Her approach to the Galactic Federation demonstrates this pattern perfectly. Rather than seeking diplomatic solutions or understanding the political complexities involved, Space Beth throws herself into rebellion as another form of motion. The longer she avoids self-reflection, the more reckless she becomes. Her adventures grow increasingly Star Warsy, as Rick puts it, suggesting she's falling into familiar patterns rather than growth. When leaving the family behind in Bethic Twinstinct, she promises to look out for her grandson. But this gesture reveals her fundamental misunderstanding of connection. She wants the emotional benefits of family relationships without the vulnerability that makes them meaningful. Space Beth represents the most dangerous kind of wasted potential of someone brilliant enough to solve complex tactical problems, but too emotionally stunted to recognize that her real enemy is herself. Her intelligence could be her salvation, but she's unwilling to stop running long enough to face herself, and all that intelligence will keep circling the same destructive patterns. Space Beth's estimated IQ, 125, despite having a strong problem-solving ability and adaptive intelligence in emergency situations, she is unable to use this intelligence for personal development. She's trapped emotionally with validation issues, similar to the next character. But she inherited the best parts of both Beth's and can pretty much adapt to any situation. Summer Smith. Beth's firstborn child often gets overlooked in the family hierarchy because she's not a genius, not a scientist, and not traditionally powerful. But she makes up for it with adaptability. When things fall apart, Summer pivots. She plays along, adjusts quickly, and finds her place in the chaos. While she's often the most emotionally grounded person in the room, Her judgment tends to collapse the moment Rick gets involved because she too wants his approval, like her mom. She wants to be useful. And in trying to earn that, she sometimes sacrifices the self-awareness that makes her strong. Summer operates just below genius level but well above average. She's emotionally literate, socially perceptive, and fast on her feet. She picks up new systems quickly, learns from mistakes, and shows more long-term growth than nearly anyone in the show. But her intelligence shines when she's on her own. When she's orbiting someone like Rick, it gets buried under her insecurities, which she inherited from her mother. Although Summer is not as scientifically gifted as her grandfather, she's still shown to be a very smart and nimble teen, at least compared to the rest of her family. But she's also sociopathic and narcissistic, like her grandfather, similar to the way that Morty responds, but only when truly pushed to his limits. Summer, however, seems more readily able to access these elements of her personality when subjected to her grandfather Rick's influence for a relatively short amount of time. Summer has shown consistently that she handles crises better than anyone else in her family. She has street smarts that the others lack. She picks up on social dynamics quickly. She reads rooms and shifts the tone depending on who she's dealing with. And when her back's against the wall, she steps up more confidently than Morty or Rick for that matter. The perfect example of her intelligent crisis management can be seen in The Ricks Must Be Crazy, when Rick and Morty travel inside the car's battery to fix it and leave Summer waiting in the car, instructing it to keep Summer safe. Things take a turn when Rick's car starts using extreme defensive tactics to protect Summer from different situations, which horrifies her, as the car's interpretation of keeping her safe involves brutal harm. In this episode, a man approaches Summer and starts banging on the window, demanding she get out, but the car extends an arm from the back and cuts him into cubes with a laser. Summer's immediate reaction shows her moral compass because she doesn't get amused and gets horrified instead. The situation escalates when more people get involved, leading to a full military standoff. To clarify, Rick's car is fully capable of destroying anything in its path, but when Summer forbid it from causing violence, it didn't do anything. Summer has unique problem-solving abilities when she's under pressure, because she didn't accept the car's violent solutions and negotiated with the AI to come up with less lethal security measures. She actually became the moral center of the entire episode just by staying calm and thinking. This represents her core strength. She becomes the most reasonable person in the room when no one's looking. This demonstrates Summer's unique intelligence. The car creates a peace treaty between humans and telepathic giant spiders that were in an active war in return for guaranteed safety. But when Rick and Morty return, they go for ice cream and Rick starts complaining that his ice cream is full of flies, to which the waitress responds by saying that it's because of the presidential peace treaty. And so, Rick starts to berate Summer for ruining ice cream. This aftermath captures Summer's position in the family. She solves complex problems with creativity and moral integrity, but gets blamed for the consequences that follow. Her intelligence worked flawlessly in the crisis, but she receives no credit for preventing a war or saving countless lives. Summer's pattern of intelligent crisis management followed by approval-seeking creates cascading problems across her relationships. In Rickmancing the Stone, while Morty grieves their parents' divorce, Summer throws herself into a Mad Max-style apocalypse. She takes on a warlord boyfriend, adapts to a kill-or-be-killed society, and thrives. But her confidence comes more from denial than strength. She uses the wasteland to bury her feelings, a lot like Space Beth. She wants to feel big in a place where everything is savage and meaningless. That way, she doesn't have to think about home or the fact that her family just exploded and nobody asked how she's doing. Rick doesn't stop her, but encourages it because he likes when people become extensions of him. Summer's intelligence gets consistently undermined by her need for validation from the worst people. In The ABCs of Beth, she gets into a petty argument with Morty over who Rick likes more, then risks her life just to win the competition. In Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, she helps clone Rick into a younger version of himself without considering what that might unleash. These decisions reveal Summer's fundamental contradiction. She's smart enough to know when she's being used, but in the moment, her need to be seen is stronger than her judgment. She doesn't want control. She wants proof that she matters, that she's more than just the background sibling. Her relationship with Rick demonstrates how her intelligence gets corrupted by his influence. Wet Kuata Mortican Summer shows how Summer does Rick's chores to get what she wants. In the beginning of the episode, she receives an attribute slider as payment for cleaning up his mess. Later on, Summer expresses her disappointment because Morty gets everything for free. Rick's response reveals his manipulative understanding of Summer's psychology. Rick then explains that Morty's a dog and people have cats as their affection is earned. This dynamic keeps Summer trapped in a cycle where her intelligence serves Rick's needs rather than her own development. When Summer leads without Rick's interference, things actually work. She has consistently shown that she handles crises better than anyone else in her family. In episodes like Raising Gazorpazorp and Promortius, she ends up being the one who navigates foreign civilizations, negotiates truces, or gets Morty and Rick out alive. In Raising Gazorpazorp, after being dismissed because of Rick's sexism, Summer is granted the perfect opportunity to prove her capability. Accompanying him on a mission to a matriarchal planet, Summer is able to take charge with Rick being forced to pose as her slave, and she manages to save both their lives when the situation goes south. By integrating into the matriarchal society with ease and knowing how to effectively communicate with the alien women when she and Rick are to be executed, Summer establishes herself as an extremely useful companion for Rick. But these successes get overshadowed by her need for his ongoing approval. Summer's strength comes with a cost. She's always reacting, always adapting to other people's chaos instead of creating her own path. She doesn't initiate as much as she survives. Her intelligence manifests in emotional literacy and social perception that surpasses most of her family. She reads social dynamics quickly, adapts her communication style, and maintains moral clarity under pressure. But these skills get buried under insecurity when she's trying to impress people who don't deserve her effort. Summer Smith's estimated IQ, 115. Above average intelligence with strong emotional and social intelligence, but her need for validation and approval-seeking behavior prevents her from fully utilizing her considerable capabilities. She might survive anything, but that doesn't mean she makes good decisions. And the people above her just rewrite the rules. Tap subscribe if you're ready for the characters who actually break the system. Summer represents the most wasted potential in the Smith family because she's too focused on external validation to develop her abilities. This also applies to the next character, who follows the same patterns. But the difference is, he's emotionally dependent on Rick, and that prevents his intelligence from evolving. Morty Smith. Morty is one of television's most compelling character evolutions, who transformed from Rick's helpless sidekick into a genuinely capable partner that's always undermining his own growth through desperate needs for validation and love. Morty started off as the weakest link that was always overwhelmed and barely capable of keeping up with Rick's world. But unlike most characters in the show, Morty evolves. He gets sharper. He questions Rick more. He learns from mistakes, even if the lessons come with permanent trauma. You can chart his growth season by season, and by the time newer episodes roll around, he's no longer the helpless tag-along. He's a partner. Not always a good one, but a partner nonetheless. Still, even as his intelligence rises, Morty stays vulnerable to emotion. He wants to be loved, respected, and understood. He wants people to think he's capable. And when those needs get triggered, his logic collapses. The difference now is, when he fails, it's because he ignores what he already knows. Morty's weakness for emotional validation shows up constantly, but nowhere is it more obvious than in how quickly he falls in love with almost anyone who shows him kindness. In Rick Potion number 9, he asks Rick to help him win Jessica's affection. The potion goes wrong, mutates the entire planet, and eventually leads to the creation of a post-apocalyptic hellscape filled with Cronenbergs. Rick and Morty abandon their original dimension altogether. Morty literally has to bury a version of himself in the backyard. You'd think that experience would teach him to stop chasing validation from crushes. But the cycle repeats in the Vat of Acid episode, where Morty uses a reality reset button to perfect romantic encounters, only to end up destroying thousands of lives and timelines just to keep a relationship going. Morty's relationship with Rick is a constant tug-of-war between reverence and resentment. He knows Rick is brilliant, but he also knows Rick is manipulative, selfish, and often emotionally abusive. Morty swings back and forth, idolizing Rick in one moment, rebelling in the next. In the Vat of Acid episode, Morty openly challenges Rick's logic, mocks his methods, and demands respect. Rick retaliates by humiliating Morty with a twisted lesson in consequences. Morty needed to push back, but the mistake was assuming Rick would play fair. Morty forgets that Rick doesn't believe in equal footing, and every time Morty gets close to outgrowing him, Rick knocks him back down. As the series progresses, Morty starts showing flashes of real tactical thinking. He becomes better at assessing danger, planning escapes, and managing high-stakes decisions. In One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, he becomes self-aware enough to deconstruct an entire genre of heist narratives by outthinking every move, seeing through manipulation, and ultimately walking away from the chaos knowing how stupid it all was. Despite everything he's learned, Morty still collapses the moment he feels important. His desire to be special, stronger, smarter, or loved overtakes his logic the moment it's within reach. In a Rick convenient Mort, Morty finds himself in an intense relationship with Planetina, a literal elemental superhero. At first, he's happy he's dating someone powerful, someone who validates him. But when Planetina becomes dangerous, Morty defends her blindly. He fights his family, refuses to let go, and even helps her commit crimes. It's the same mistake he made with Jessica, with Unity, with everyone. Morty substitutes emotional connection for critical thinking, and when that connection cracks, the fallout is catastrophic for everyone around him. The tragedy is that Morty knows what he's capable of. He's just not ready to let go of being liked. Morty started around the 95 to 100 IQ range as a nervous, reactive, and slow-to-process character. But by the most recent seasons, he's working closer to 115, maybe even 120 on a good day. He learns, he adapts, and grows in ways other characters don't. Morty Smith's estimated IQ, 95 to 120. Rapidly evolving intelligence with strong pattern recognition and tactical thinking. But emotional dependency and validation seeking consistently undermine his growth and potential. He's not dumb, he's just not free yet. The biggest proof of that comes from Evil Morty, the version of him that fully broke away from Rick, formed his own ideology, and exposed the terrifying truths behind the central finite curve. Evil Morty is what happens when Morty doesn't crave Rick's approval, and that's what we're getting into next. Evil Morty. Morty's alternate self may not be the smartest person in the room, but he's the one who built the room, rigged it, trapped everyone inside it, and walked away without any remorse. He's a very calculated character, and unlike regular Morty, who swings between growth and regression depending on how Rick treats him, Evil Morty doesn't need Rick's approval. In fact, his entire existence is built on rejecting it. Everything about him, from his tone to his tactics, suggests long-term planning. He doesn't monologue unless it serves a purpose. He doesn't get personal unless it gives him leverage. And while we haven't seen the full scope of his endgame yet, the steps we have seen already place him far above every other Morty and most Ricks. Evil Morty represents the ultimate evolution of what happens when a Morty completely breaks free from Rick's psychological control. Where regular Morty still craves validation and struggles with emotional dependency, Evil Morty has achieved something far more dangerous: complete emotional detachment from the systems that define everyone else's existence. Evil Morty's first appearance in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind set the tone for who he really is. A version of Morty who's not interested in dominating people, but in manipulating systems. He hides behind a brainwashed evil Rick, stages fake evidence to frame another Rick, and lets the multiverse do the dirty work. While everyone's chasing decoys, evil Morty blends into the background, writing code that allows him to escape detection. The genius of his initial plan was the misdirection. While every Rick was focused on finding the mastermind, they completely overlooked the possibility that a Morty could be orchestrating everything. Their own opinions became their blind spot, and evil Morty exploited that perfectly. When evil Morty returns in the Ricklantis mix-up, he's not an outsider anymore. He's embedded himself in the Citadel's political system as candidate Morty, who's running for president in a Morty-only election. This time, he outmaneuvered Rick in practically every version of himself. He wins by pretending to be moderate, by pretending to care about the poor, by promising hope in a broken Morty-class system that was designed to be hopeless. But the second he takes power, he executes every opposing faction, including the Ricks who supported him. Evil Morty's campaign was about access, and once he had that access, he pressed a button that everyone else was too afraid to touch. The presidential election revealed that evil Morty has a terrifying quality about him, which was his ability to understand and manipulate hope itself. He knew exactly what desperate Mortys wanted to hear, delivered it in convincing fashion, then used their trust to gain the power necessary for his real agenda. In Rick Mirai Jack, evil Morty reveals his greatest achievement. He discovered the existence of the central finite curve, the multiversal firewall that separates universes where Rick is the smartest man from ones where he isn't. He exposed Rick's entire ideology in one move, destroying the story he had built around himself. The genius of it was the motivation. Evil Morty wanted to escape the machine Rick built to protect his own ego and dismantle the lie that Ricks are inevitable and Mortys are disposable. Most Ricks are obsessed with being at the center of the universe, and evil Morty just wanted out, so he found the means to do so and escape through the central finite curve. This was him choosing to leave the system entirely, while everyone else fights over scraps of power within Rick's system. What makes evil Morty so dangerous is his emotional control because he never flinches under pressure, much like Space Beth. He sees other Mortys trying to rebel but still chasing validation. He sees Ricks trying to control everything but falling apart the moment their authority is questioned. Evil Morty stays detached from all of it. He understands what the universe is and doesn't waste time pretending it can be changed from within. That kind of clarity requires more than brains. It requires a total rejection of the roles other characters cling to. Evil Morty stopped being a Morty the moment he realized the game was rigged and never looked back once he escaped. The most unsettling thing about evil Morty is that we still don't know what he's really after. After crossing into the wider multiverse, he doesn't deliver a victory speech or reveal a master plan. He just walks away, and that means his next move could come from anywhere at any time. Other characters want attention, revenge, or validation. Evil Morty wants freedom, and the only reason we haven't seen him since is because he doesn't need us to. Evil Morty is the rare character who truly transcends the show's power structure. He's not a Morty that's a reflection of Rick's flaws. He's an anomaly that proves intelligence isn't about tech. Evil Morty's estimated IQ, 140 to 145. Exceptional strategic intelligence with perfect emotional control and systems thinking. But his true power comes from his complete rejection of the psychological dependencies that limit everyone else. He hijacked the Citadel, exposed Rick's whole belief system, and walked away without flinching, and he's still not number one. Hit subscribe because the only person left is the reason this list exists. Evil Morty comes closest in terms of philosophical awareness, but Rick still outclasses him in raw intellect, tech ability, and multiversal dominance. Rick is the ceiling. Everyone else is just figuring out how to survive under it. Rick Sanchez. There's no debate, Rick Sanchez is the smartest character in the multiverse. No one invents faster, improvises better, or understands more about reality than he does. He builds time-freezing crystals out of trash. He upgrades planets like apps. He outwits cosmic gods, time cops, and other versions of himself on a weekly basis. If intelligence were measured purely by processing power, Rick would be off the charts. But intelligence isn't judgment. It's not wisdom. It's not stability.
And that's where Rick collapses, over and over again. His mind is unmatched, but his emotional maturity hasn't evolved past a bored teenager. He doesn't grow and alienates everyone who tries to love him. And no matter how often his plans succeed, the results always end up hollow, self-destructive, or worse. He's the smartest man in the universe, and he uses that intelligence to sabotage everything. Rick doesn't want to be understood. He wants to be obeyed. That's why he surrounds himself with weaker versions of himself, less competent Mortys, and family members too traumatized to challenge him. He calls it freedom, but it's all about control. The clearest example of this is the central finite curve, a multiversal filter Rick helped create to isolate realities where he's always the smartest person alive. He did it to avoid ever being questioned, essentially reshaping infinity to protect his ego. And then, once he built that structure, he locked himself inside it and convinced himself it was a throne, but it was a cage. Rick tends to cling to the only parts of it that make him feel superior, which is fear dressed up as brilliance. Rick prides himself on being above sentiment. He treats emotions like viruses that are dangerous if not eliminated. But that philosophy doesn't make him rational. It makes him dangerous. For reference, he transforms himself into a literal pickle, just to avoid therapy in Pickle Rick. Then he survives an entire sewer system using rats and recycled organs, crashes into a government black site, and defeats an entire paramilitary squad just to prove he didn't need help. He risked death, torture, and international conflict rather than face a conversation about his own behavior, which many may categorize as pathology. Rick's problem is that he resents other people for having them. He mocks Morty for caring, manipulates Beth's need for approval, and weaponizes Summer's loyalty. And when anyone gets too close, he either abandons them or pushes them away with cruelty. In his eyes, people are functions. Morty is a buffer against the Council. Beth is a failed clone experiment. Jerry is comic relief. Even Bird Person, his only real friend, gets used as a pawn in Rick's broader story. In The Wedding Squanchers, Rick tries to keep his distance, warns the group not to go to the wedding, and then acts surprised when things go bad. But when Tammy reveals herself as a Galactic Federation agent and kills Bird Person, Rick just runs instead of mourning his only friend. After Mr. Poopy Butthole, of course. Rick has access to infinite timelines, endless resets, and more power than any mortal being should, but he drinks himself unconscious, tortures versions of himself, sabotages peace, and kills gods. Then complains about it later because that's just how he's wired. In Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die Rickpeat, he dies dozens of times across realities, waking up in clone bodies and immediately rejecting each one for being not Rick enough. He can't even tolerate alternate versions of himself because they challenge the illusion that he's the default. In the Rickshank Redemption, he dismantles the Galactic Federation and the Citadel in one move because he's mad about a condiment. He literally ends intergalactic order over Szechuan sauce, and he frames the entire thing as a personal mission. Every time Rick reaches a plateau of influence or peace, he wrecks it, and it's because he hates the feeling of stillness, since chaos keeps him feeling alive. And when it's not there, he creates it. His genius just gives him bigger tools to bury his emotions instead of protecting him from them. In Rick Mirai Jack, we finally see Rick's backstory. His original wife and daughter were murdered by another Rick, and that was when he decided to spend decades building tech, traveling dimensions, and hunting that version down. It's the origin he never shared and the one that explains his obsession with control. But once Rick finds his enemy, he joins him instead of killing him, builds the Citadel, and becomes a part of the same system that caused him pain. This is where Rick's intelligence betrays him most. He knows what hurt him and knows what he became. But instead of stopping the cycle, he reinforces it, spreads it, and becomes the Rick other Rick's fear by choice. He tells himself it's the only way to survive. But the truth is, he doesn't know who he'd be without the pain. So he keeps it close, even when it devours him. Later, when he resurrects Bird Person in Ricternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, it's not about healing a friendship. It's about fixing a loose end. Evil Morty comes closest in terms of philosophical awareness and strategic independence, but Rick still outclasses him in raw intellect, tech ability, and multiversal dominance, and his IQ is off the charts. Easily 170 or higher, possibly beyond measurable limits. He's an inventor, strategist, physicist, linguist, and universe-hopping tactician with virtually no equal. He outsmarts gods, dismantles civilizations, and rewrites reality like it's nothing. But none of that has made him wise. In fact, the smarter he gets, the more emotionally stunted he becomes. No amount of intelligence can break the cycles of self-destruction he is caught in because of his refusal to process grief, his control issues that undermine trust, and his arrogance that replaces caution. He's proof that being the smartest person in the room means nothing if you can't figure out how to be happy in it. His emotional stunting and self-destructive tendencies turn his gifts into weapons against his own happiness. He built a multiverse that bends to his will, but no amount of power has ever made him whole. Some of these characters evolved, some collapsed, but every single one proved that intelligence alone doesn't mean you make smart choices. Every character in Rick and Morty is fighting their own brain just as much as the world around them. And no matter how high they climb, they all find new ways to fall. If you're into this kind of breakdown, hit subscribe.